Kia ora, everyone. Welcome to the next of our 2019 conversation series, 3 conversations with New Zealand arts marketers who are sharing their experiences with digital marketing. This video is part of Creative New Zealand's Optimised video series, which we at the Audience Connection are proud to curate. I'm Vicky Orpris-Hill, and I'm talking today to Chrissy Irvine, who is Operations Manager at The Big Idea Te Aria Nui, and we are going to be talking today about storytelling. The Big Idea really needs little introduction. It is well known and well utilised as the online resource for the arts in New Zealand. It provides individuals and organisations with daily news updates, jobs and opportunities and events, as well as ideas and inspiration from across the creative industries. Welcome, Chrissy.
Hello.
Very impressive numbers I'm seeing from The Big Idea, over 50,000 members and 27,000 social media followers. And I know that your strategy around telling stories has played a significant role in this. Storytelling's interesting. I was reading a recent piece by brand storytelling coach Celine Da Costa, and she put it like this. She said, it's not enough to have a quality product or service. You need to know how to talk about it in a way that differentiates you from the crowd. And storytelling will not only increase your brand favorability in your audience's eyes, but it can also be up to 22 times more memorable than facts. So clearly storytelling is a valuable tool in an arts marketer's armory. And there are so many stories for us to tell. So Chrissy, can you share why you believe that storytelling is a valuable way for arts organisations and artists and creative practitioners to connect with their audiences?
Yes, I would love to. Thank you, Vicky, by the way, for having us. It's a real pleasure to represent The Big Idea today. So I'll dive right in to answer your question, and of course I'll jump right in to talk about artists. So artists are storytellers, and they tell their stories about society and cultural issues we experience. So they do this through the visual mediums and other methods of storytelling, whether that's a dancer on the stage, a painter with a paintbrush, or a writer with a pen. It's actually their job to tell stories. But we find that the trouble is that artists don't think that they have to tell their own story. But when they do, we think that magic happens. So over on The Big Idea, we have over 1 million page views per year from people trying to find a connection into the art world. And of course, arts organisations also represent creators, and it's their job to tell these personal stories too. So we know that as a sector, we can be really, really fragmented, and it can be quite isolating for people. I personally know of lots of creators who don't actually network with other artists, for instance. And we think that The Big Idea fills that gap in some way. So what we do is we profile people across the country, and we show that yes, there are actually artists out here doing it, and they are successful. What's really interesting is that if someone reads an article on The Big Idea, sometimes we might get an email from them to tell us that they'd like to collaborate with that person that they've read about, and so they try to find if they can do that through us, which is, we think that's really exciting. We have noticed as well that when someone else tells your story, for instance, if we pay a writer to interview an artist, it's incredibly motivating and it's really validating to that person who's being interviewed and written about. So it shows them that they've got an impact, that people actually want to hear about their story, and that the sector appreciates that person. There are heaps of cool examples of how artists and organisations use social media these days, and they're connecting directly with their audiences, as we know. So Instagram in particular, we think is a really amazing resource for artists, and I love seeing how different people use it to get their art out there. So I've seen some artists use Instagram stories on a daily basis. So they're showing us through their studios, through their latest exhibitions, what commissions they're working on, and their different art processes. People like Layla Walter and Evie Kemp, we think, are really good examples. The cool part of this is that they make you feel like you're their friend, and it helps you to feel like you're on the inside of their world. And of course, it connects you to their work on a deeper level, which we haven't experienced before social media. while this approach, of course, isn't for every single artist, we know that artists can be quite shy. It's a really cool example of how you can connect with your audience and while also educating other creatives on your processes. And I really do believe that as a community, we can learn from each other in terms of how artists can actually sell their art online. So over on the Big Ideas Instagram page, we've had a few artists take over our account. They do a little day in the life of Soul Takeover, which is really fun. They use our main feed to post work in progress and finished work, and then they use the stories to show their processes like I talked about before. So one highlight for me personally was Kylie Rusk. So she took over our account for a day. She's a painter and she also makes lithographic prints. So she showed us how to prepare a stone for etching and how she makes her prints using this really, really old method. And it was something I'd never actually seen before. And it really helped me to connect to her work on a deeper level and actually see the art for itself and understand what process went in behind that.
I love this perspective. It's true that people want to hear stories and to see the inside of an artist's creative process, and also the inside of an arts organisation's process or a creative practitioner of any kind, an arts manager, etc. And also that by sharing these stories, we really are helping our audience to understand our art on a deeper level. That's great. It's, it really has been quite noticeable to me as a reader of The Big Idea that you've been focusing on storytelling and doing a really strong job of it across all of your digital channels. We'd love to hear about the strategy behind this.
Yeah, of course. So thank you so much for saying that, by the way. That's lovely. It's really affirming to hear that. We're probably best known for our job board, and that links people directly to opportunities across the country. But what a lot of people don't know is that we also publish stories and we showcase artists' struggles and successes. And we really celebrate creatives across our social media channels as well, and that helps accelerate their connection within that art world. And I guess the other thing is that we get really bored of hearing about arts writing being cut out of newspapers, and the demise of arts media really makes the sector feel unappreciated, unimportant. So what we're trying to do is to fight against that by sharing more and more stories. And I guess it's a good thing to point out, when I started a year ago, we were publishing maybe 2 stories a week, and last month we published a story a day and tens more on social media from other outlets. And we're doing this with the same resource, but to us, it's what actually holds the online arts community together, and we would continue to push this uniting agenda. So the Big Idea is the biggest and oldest of its kind in terms of an art platform, and it's 17 years old this year. So
wow.
Part of the new, yeah,
That's so fun.
Yeah. Part of the new strategic direction is to bolster and showcase more and more artists and art organisations through storytelling. We do this in a number of ways, and we have a number of different columns to respond to various needs that showed up when we spoke to our community a year ago. And I'll just go through a couple of examples of the different columns.
Would love to hear about some of these columns and kind of what's the thinking behind them.
Yeah, cool. So the Lowdown, which I think a lot of people have heard about, that's an opinionated weekly digest of art stories that have made it into New Zealand media in the past week. So whether it's an interview with an artist on RNZ, or it might be a review on someone's show or an announcement from the sector. And the idea for this Lowdown actually came from Mark Amory himself, and he runs that column. And we find that people really love Mark's writing, and he's a great storyteller. And we really want to replicate that Lowdown in the regions across the country. And have you heard about Advice to the 22-year-old self?
I sure have.
Cool. That's a pretty cool one as well. So basically, with Advice to my 22-year-old self, we get mid to late career artists reflect on their artistic lives and talk directly to their younger selves, and in essence to a younger audience. So That column actually started from a question we asked Simon Denny about where the big idea could add value, and he said it was his 22-year-old self that needed the advice, not the older version of himself. So that's how we started that one.
That's great. It has got me thinking, what would I tell my 22-year-old self? So I think it's a really
Yeah,
effective feature. Yeah.
yeah, it's really interesting to see what people say actually. Um, and who got the gig as well is a column for our nosy Parkers. It explains who got the job from our job board, and it talks a bit about their career and what led them to getting that job. So that's pretty cool. Um, Art Smarts is our most well-read column. It's a really important resource for creatives. It's basically a breakdown of tips and tools that creatives can use, but it's in a New Zealand context, which is really important in terms of when we're writing about tax tips or GST. We also do a bunch of different stuff on, for instance, how to diversify income streams through your art, what online tools you might like to use to make your life a bit easier, or even tips on working remotely. And our writer Sam Grover has a pretty straight to the point style, which our readers really enjoy. Um, and of course, the last one I'll talk about today is called Soapbox, and that's a chance for people to stand up and say what's really on their mind. And we find the best part about Soapbox is when someone reads that Soapbox and then sends through their reaction to the article to us. So whether that's to the editor's inbox or on social media. And we've often asked those people who have commented to write an opposing Soapbox to extend that conversation so we can see two sides to one coin.
I love that. I love that you're turning that into a conversation rather than a one-way communication. So that's
Yeah,
really great.
yeah, exactly. And I guess that's part of our strategy to be a voice of advocacy for the arts.
Hmm.
So yeah, each of our articles fit into a really specific column, and I won't go over all of them today, but you can easily check them out on the website. And we found this way of working to be really beneficial for content planning. Um, we make sure that we don't post one of the same each week. For instance, we don't post multiple soapboxes per week. Um, and we've also implemented a new system which ranks the importance of different types of articles, and that determines how much resource we put into an article.
That's just incredible output. And also I love this suite of article types and how you've categorized them and how each one of those maps back to your overall goals as an organization. And it's really demonstrating that behind every successful piece of content is a well thought out strategy. And I think also true understanding of audiences and how to use digital content to reach them. And you're talking a lot about what the audience wants and how you can deliver to them. I know that our viewers will lap up any particular specific examples you have about a piece of content that's worked well for you and how you planned, developed, and distributed that content across your channels.
Cool. Yeah. So I could talk all day about the different stories that we're sharing on the platform.
I could listen all day, honestly.
One of our most recent additions is a column called Arts Insiders, and we've got two of those articles displayed on the slide here. So what we do with that is we take an angle and feature leaders from arts organisations, and we pay a writer to interview and tell their stories. So a couple of weeks ago, we interviewed Simon Bowden about him leaving the Arts Foundation, and that was a pretty big story because it answered a lot of questions that no one else had covered yet. And of course, it was a story of tribute for the 17 years of passion and service he had to the Arts Foundation. A cause for celebration of Simon's success and a chance for the community to learn what he did and what's going to happen to the foundation next. So we targeted publication 3 days out from his leaving for that one. Of course, also there was Michael Moynihan, and that was really fascinating one on his leadership of the arts and the wellbeing agenda. Michael's story was actually a part of a week-long arts and wellbeing feature which we did, and it featured the minister launching a new initiative. We collaborated with Arts Access, Professor Peter O'Connor's team at the University of Auckland, Canterbury District Health Board, and a range of artists to tell different stories about arts and wellbeing. and we'd love to do more of these themed weeks moving forward. We think they're really important and interesting as well. So as a team, we dedicate more resource into these stories in terms of planning, choosing the right writers, publishing the story on the day of the week where the website might get the most hits, and putting it pretty high on our priority list on the bulletin and our social media posts. And the other thing, of course, is that if it's a really important story, we would then put money into that on Facebook and Instagram as well.
You know, what's popping out for me is the collaboration thing you mentioned, working in partnership with others, and also the themed week idea. And both of those are great ideas for amplifying your message and getting that wider audience, kind of creating entry points into your content. But also what's really impressing me is your data-driven approach. So you're using data from a range of sources to drive decisions. You know, I'm really impressed that you're making resourcing decisions around content based on data, and also obviously this is helping you to make decisions on future content. So I'm interested to hear a little bit more about how you measure and track your content, and how you're pulling out this data and using it kind of on a day-to-day basis.
For sure. So I think that's a really important question, and we believe that it's really crucial to track your results using trusted sources. And there aren't that many secrets, to be honest, and I'm sure a lot of people out there have heard about these tools that I'm going to talk about. So we use Google Analytics to track our website stats, and we review these statistics every single week in our team meetings. And then based on those results, we discuss as a team why something took off or why something flopped. And that could be due to a headline, a photo, the way it may have appeared on social media or in our bulletins. And we think if we think that there's an improvement we could make, we might make some changes to that article. And you see media giants like Stuff doing this all the time. They're constantly changing titles and imagery for their published articles. We also use Sprout Social, and that allows you to schedule social media posts across different platforms, and it also really has a fantastic reporting feature. So we use Sprout Social reporting to look at what our top social posts were, and again, as a team, we'll discuss about why this may have been. And then once a month, I prepare a one-pager. It's called the Big Ideas Dashboard Report, and that compiles all our data from Google Analytics, Sprout Social, and our website into one document. This document shows how we're tracking against this time last year and against the previous month. And so we benchmark ourselves against our previous data to see if our efforts are improving the stats or not. And I'm happy to report that it's working. Yeah, so we've had a really exponential increase in our stats since bolstering our content strategy and outputs. If the stats were stagnant or going down, then of course we would be reviewing our strategies and methods. But this one pager is really crucial for our board, for our funding partners, our advertisers, to see what results we're producing. And it makes us accountable as well.
You know, this consistent and rigorous review process is really great to see. And I think what's also clear to me is that all these principles and strategies you're talking about can be applied by any arts marketer to their work in this area, no matter how small their organisation. I think there's really useful things in here, and particularly around how you're doing this tracking, which I know many struggle with. In terms of storytelling, what differences are you finding between channels? So how do you adapt content for different digital platforms, and what works for you?
Yeah, that's a tricky one to answer. So of course there are differences between each platform, and as we experiment with the different channels, we're always learning. And especially as the social media giants are always changing their algorithms, and it means that we have to change our approach as well. So we target different material to different platforms, And we recently actually had a content strategy workshop with an expert. And what he did was really challenged us to utilize our channels to make the most of the different audiences and the different habits on each platform. So over on Facebook, we've got over 11,000 followers, and we use that to share our articles, our top jobs from the job board, and we also share other arts news from other places. We've found that Facebook loves it when you share links to other people's pages, and we think it's probably because they want to keep you on Facebook and not take you off to another website. So if we post an article to our own website, it might not get placed very high in the algorithm, but if someone else shares our post, then we see the click-throughs and the engagement starting to go up. And then
what a great insight, what a great insight that you can then use for the future planning of content on that platform.
It's really interesting how determined they are to keep you on the platform.
Yes, that's for sure.
So in terms of LinkedIn, so we are trialing a new strategy where we only post articles that relate to career development and jobs, because we know that that's what people are on LinkedIn specifically for. And of course, Instagram is all about the image, and we are still learning about what the Instagram community is looking for. We know it's a visual channel, so it really needs to be curated with a pretty keen eye. And of course, we want to be doing more and more Instagram takeovers to showcase artists' work and processes, and we find that our audience actually really enjoys these versus just a post about an article on our website. And it was actually you, Vicky, when you ran the digital marketing course for Creative New Zealand, who said that Instagram takeovers were a good way to introduce someone interesting to your followers and the connection that they then get to that other person's account. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it definitely expands your audience, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. We really find that if someone does a takeover, that their audience comes over with them to follow us, and then our audience goes over to follow them. And it's a really fun way to build an audience with pretty engaging content. And then Twitter is another ballgame entirely, as we know, and we don't see ourselves as Twitter masters yet. But what we try to do on there is get behind what's happening across the country and across the world, but with an arts-specific focus. And we retweet interesting content from others, and we also share articles and jobs from the Big Idea website, of course. Our following on there is about 14,000, so we're conscious of serving the needs of our Twitter followers. And when we're at conferences and events, we try to do live tweeting, so those that aren't at those events can follow along with what's happening there.
Now that's a really effective use of Twitter, disseminating content from a conference or an event to people who can't be there in the room. So yeah, that's a great one. I'm really loving your distinct approach for each channel. It's something at the Audience Connection we're really hot on. We work with people to develop channel plans for each channel and really think through the objectives and the audience's tone of voice, content, and even best practices like posting frequency for each individual channel. And it's amazing how they come out of that process really seeing the distinction, being really clear on and it's you can't just dump a piece of content on every channel in exactly the same way. You really have to think about how you curate across the channels. So I'm just really grateful that you shared these insights, because I know how helpful these will be to arts organisations and artists who are starting to use storytelling as a tool. So if someone were starting out and they didn't have a lot of resource, what would be some top tips from you on how to get started or what to think about?
I think that the way content creation and digital marketing is moving, it's moving towards people-driven storytelling, as we've talked about, and of course influencer-led campaigns. No one wants to read media releases anymore, and we've become really allergic to them. People want to hear the human story, right? The person who made the event happen, the artist who created the art, and the call to action we find should always come second to that. In terms of influencing, like artists can be influencers themselves. So if we write an article and the artist shares it on Twitter or on Instagram, or they email it out to their own network, we see a pretty big spike in readership of that article. So I would really encourage artists, if someone is writing something about it, to share it with your network, and that will really magnify the engagement. Your network does want to hear about what you're doing, and it's okay to share it. You're not boasting. That's what really works for us, and that's what we look for when someone pitches to us. So we find it pretty hard, yeah, like I said, to turn a media release into an article, which prompts someone to read beyond the first couple of sentences. We're always asking ourselves, what's the hook? What's in it for the community reading it? And also, because our sector is so siloed into different practices, we want to know how we can make stories go beyond the silo of the art form. For instance, how do you craft a story about a dancer so that a painter could learn something from it as well? And we find that each silo is really small, but when you're able to tell a story to all artistic communities, then you suddenly have a much bigger audience base. And that's a really exciting and dynamic challenge. And we all know a lot of great artists who actually use multiple mediums themselves. And lastly, of course, you need to have good systems as well. And we use a free tool called Trello, and that has a calendar add-on, and that's how we plan out our content. Sprout Social, while that's really expensive, it does save us a lot of time, as we're able to schedule the posts out to different social media platforms in one place, and we run our in-depth reports from there as well. And there are cheaper versions that do similar things. So for instance, for Instagram, you could look at using a tool called Later, and that's a free version which you can plan out your posts specifically for Instagram and schedule them to publish automatically.
What's really coming through loud and clear is your systems and your processes. And I think without them, that vision wouldn't be a daily reality for you. So I think some of these tools that you're using and some of the processes you have in place are things that other arts marketers can really take on board. And anyone, artists as well, who are doing content planning. A lot of these tools are like Trello, for example. We use Trello a lot. It's accessible to anyone as a free tool, the free version. So yeah, that's great. And just your regular reviewing and things like that. It's really important for others to learn from that. And it's not just about writing and producing the content, it's about all that thought behind it. We do encourage you to visit and see the Big Idea storytelling work for yourselves.
Yes, yeah, you can find, so our website is www.thebigidea.nz. We send a couple of newsletters each week. One of them is focused on jobs and career development, and then the other is our top stories, as well as jobs, events, and community announcements. You can sign up for those on our website, and you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. You just have to search for The Big Idea NZ.
Great. Well, thank you, Chrissy. I'm just very grateful for your generosity in sharing your knowledge and experience and the time you put into this. So thank you from all of us listening.
You're welcome. Thank you, Vicky. It's been really great talking to you.
And for those of you listening, if you have any questions, feel free to post them under the video, or also to go directly to Chrissy and The Big Idea, or ask us. And watch also for the other interviews in this conversation series for 2019, because we're also talking about video content and distribution, and also Google grants and advertising. So thank you.